Hey.
Praveet, hello. Happy to hear you, and happy for us to keep going with the second season of Ukrainian Spaces. And thank you, everyone, guys, for joining. But a special thank you to all our sponsors, who are also I'm seeing here as well. Thank you for keep us going and for your growing support. That means a lot that we are able to continue with Ukrainian Spaces.
Absolutely. But I think, Maxim, we just spoke earlier, and I think you jinxed my sound situation because I have really loud construction in the background. So I apologize for that in advance. But I think without spending more time right now on other things, we can jump right in to introducing Ukrainian Spaces for everyone who's joining us for the first time and for those who are joining us again, and then going straight into our conversation with Sevgil, who is joining us today. But yeah, as Maxim said, welcome to season 2 of Ukrainian Spaces, which is our podcast and live Twitter space that elevates Ukrainian voices and decolonizes conversations about Ukraine. Why we're here, it's easy. We keep seeing millions of Ukrainians with perfect English sharing their stories across different social media platforms. Yet, even 6 months into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many conversations about Ukraine still seem to be dominated by Western pundits. What many of them seem to miss is the necessity to look at what's going on in Ukraine through the lens of Russian colonialism that has ravished the lands of Eastern Europe and Central Asia for centuries. So we want to be able to give the floor to Ukrainians from different backgrounds, different specialisms, and really foster a relaxed, safe, and chill space for us Ukrainians to express themselves without the need of fitting Western boxes. And the rest who are joining us can use the space to educate themselves and decolonize their views of Ukrainians and Ukraine. And once again, thank you everyone for joining. I'll pass back to Maksym, who can introduce our one and only guest.
Actually, I'm also extra excited and a bit nervous as well because Sevgil is such a important voice, especially as a fellow journalist and for journalists like myself. So we've been wanting to feature her and her work for a long time, and finally it's possible to do. But also it's a great timing because the word Crimea is so much used these days for many various reasons, and as, for example, President Zelensky mentioned some time ago, that it's important to keep Crimea in our focus because Ukrainian anti-colonial struggle started with Crimea in 2014, and it will end there as well. So wanted to invite Sevgil. Sevgil, hey, can you hear us?
Good evening. Good evening. Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining. So let's jump right in. And we have a golden rule that all Ukrainians coming to Ukrainian Spaces and Ukrainians that we feature, they always have the right to introduce themselves the way they wanted it. So please do introduce yourself for everyone else, who you are, where you come from.
I usually introduce myself as Ukrainian journalist from Crimea. And I think it's... also, I'm chief editor of Ukrainska Pravda, which is leading newspaper now in Ukraine. We have around 4 million readers every day. I'm Crimean Tatar, and I think that it means a lot in my identity. Also, I'm a singer sometime, but not today, I hope. But let us see. So that's it. And I'm Ukrainian Crimean Tatar with Crimean Tatar origin. This is also one of part of my identity, and I realized it only around maybe 6 months ago. Not 6 months ago, but when the large-scale war started.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we often talk about that, it's been 6 months, but in a way for many Ukrainians, it feels both like one long day or a decade at the same time. And of course, we've been I think every Ukrainian has been fighting in many different ways since February, doing what they can. But you often say these days that truth is an important weapon that Ukraine has. Maybe we don't have as much military power to fight back against this genocide, but truth is on our side. So can you tell us a bit more? What do you think truth, what kind of role it has in these days, and specifically for you, and how it helps you to fight?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because yesterday I had a discussion because I'm now preparing for a conference in Berlin, and I had a discussion with my partner. What is important to say, and what will be interesting after 6 months of war. Because I think that it's quite different from the beginning, from like when it was 6 months ago, and now we have quite different situation, and unfortunately a little bit less focus on Ukraine, and we need to rethink a lot of things. Sorry for that. I think that why truth is important and why truth is challenging also for Ukraine, because first of all, as a Ukrainian journalist, I need to think for both things. I need to think about principles. I need to think about, because we have our principles, our standards, and our enemy, I mean Russia, they don't have such principles. They use propaganda in all ways they can. And you can fight only with the truth, and you can fight against them only with following your rules, following your principles. And it's not it's not easy. It's not easy. At the same time, you have to think about how to protect people, how to think about not to harm. And it's also important because reporting during the war, you have to think that people can be in danger. Telling the truth, telling the story of people also can be challenging because, for example, when you are reporting about people that are in capture, that now, for example, Azov, you have to think. For example, I can share this story that we recorded some stories with Azov prisoners, from Azovstal prisoners before. And I have a discussion every single day with my colleague when we can publish it, because now it's not a good time for that, because we're thinking about them, we're thinking about their natives, and situation is still very dangerous, very challenging. Maybe I will stop here and then.
Yeah. I actually also sharing right now some of the links for the conversation, and specifically your absolutely stunning TED talk that you gave about the truth about the war, the truth about the war in Ukraine. So everyone else, please check out after this, because it's absolutely important, especially very relevant up to this day. But I also wanted to bring everyone's attention to the work of Ukrainian journalists in general, to understand, hearing you speaking about ethics and keep reporting no matter what, and being also cognizant about the responsibility that you have as a journalist reporting on such topic as genocide and war. It's incredible, because on the other hand, what a lot of people do not understand, that for many Ukrainian journalists, their lives are being also torn apart by this war. So you need to work and you need to keep going. At the same time, your family, yourself feeling the consequences of this genocide. And of course, with Crimea, I also have family members in occupied Crimea, and now another part of the family isolated on newly occupied Russian lens. So this is something that you struggle every day as a journalist as well, juggling all that emotional toll and also what you have to do.
My favorite, not my favorite, but one of the story I want to share then. In the days when it was a battle near Kiev, Ukrainska Pravda published names of Russian soldiers and that fighting in Ukraine. And when I first found this information, when I checked it, and I checked everything. So and we decided to publish it. My partner asked me, but you have to think about your parents because they were just a few kilometers away from them, like 4 or 6 kilometers from them. And the same story was with all our colleagues. And we decided to publish it even in such conditions. And I think it was a very important decision. And of course, you have to think about your parents. During this war, one of our colleagues, who is a news editor of Ukrainska Pravda, Evgeny Kizilov, he lost his father. His father was brutally killed by Russian soldiers in Bucha in the beginning of March, when Bucha was occupied by Russians. But Zhenya did everything possible to stay, to do his work as great as he can. So, and I think it's also, it means a lot.
Yeah. And, it just goes to show that we talk a lot about how for a very long time, and Maksym has been saying this for a very long time, people have been not judgmental, but wary of people from a certain country reporting on that country. But I think the stories that you shared go to show how much commitment and how much sort of, despite everything, ethical standards people have for telling the truth, disregarding everything. And I think that just shows to a lot of our Western colleagues who have these assumptions some of the time that maybe we're like too connected, too emotional, to whatever, to report on our own countries are wrong in a lot of ways. Which makes me kind of move on to a question, to our main topic on the question of Crimea. You spoke about your background and your identity a little bit. And one of the things that we do here with Ukrainian Spaces is try to question some of common misconceptions that have existed or exist amongst Western audiences, foreign audiences. So what do you think are some of sort of the biggest misconceptions about Crimea that you have personally been fighting against? And what do you think we should really try and highlight whenever we talk about Crimea and maybe Crimean Tatars?
Here I want to mention that we moved to Crimea when I was 2.5 years old, and my sister was just 6 months old. We were Crimean Tatars that were deported in 1944 by Stalin. So we were deported from Crimean Peninsula because all Crimean Tatars were accused on collaborating with the occupiers, and more than 200,000 people Stalin expelled from Crimea, and most of them were women and children. And we were for 50 years we were forbidden to live in Crimea, and we also were not mentioned in Soviet history books and in Soviet newspapers. So I was 2.5 years old, and it was just collapse of the Soviet Union. Our curtain fell, but it was challenging time for all Crimean Tatars because we just came for our land, and people were not happy to see us. And I think everyone with Crimean Tatar origin faced with racism, with all these negative things. But Crimea, in the beginning of 90s, it was a very interesting place. And when I started to speak about it, people even didn't believe me first time. Because, for example, So we lived in independent Ukraine, but we taught the alphabet and mathematics using Soviet textbooks. It was my childhood. I went to the first to school, and I remember this book. I remember the Soviet textbook was mentioning like and etc. So we celebrated Independence Day, but at the same time, like city residents went to demonstration on the anniversary of the Great Socialist Revolution. So it was really a strange place, and but I didn't realize it, and I didn't feel like that. I realized it just in 2014. It's interesting, but I still know a lot of Soviet songs about our victory, about everything, because it was my childhood. Like literally in my school, we taught only like Soviet songs about victory, about great Soviet army, etc. But at the same time, in my family, my grandmother shared the stories about deportation, about struggle, about resistance of Crimean Tatar people. But I didn't realize it. I didn't feel like a part of this identity. And at the same time, at school, teachers usually said that, okay, Ukrainian language is a part of Russian language. You don't even need to learn it. It's quite the same language. You don't need it. You will not need it in future. And it was also, and I realized it only like in 2014 after occupation of Crimea. So what kind of stereotypes we had about Crimea before, and I faced with such stereotypes in Ukraine when I came to Kiev. Usually that we are Muslim, Crimean Tatars, and all these like extremist things I heard from my classmates. It was normal. Like, and I started just to say that it's not true. It's not okay. It's quite different from your perspective. It's stereotype. And I remember when security services in Crimea also started they formed the new department that will focus on Crimean Tatar threat. So it is also true, and it's a part of history of our country, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thanks so much for sharing your personal family stories. I mean, Crimea is close to my heart as well. So many years our family from my mother's side spent in Crimea, and my father's side also spent Crimea. They're not Crimean Tatar, but actually the funny thing that my grandfather's first language was Crimean Tatar because he was, he was raised in Crimean Tatar village. I'm not going to be sharing it, the name publicly, but still. But it always like fascinated me how the stories that they would tell about Crimea and all this convoluted relations that they had with Russian settlers in Crimea, Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, especially when they started coming back. And with years, it kind of gave me understanding, kind of a wow factor that by understanding Crimea, you can actually understand lots about Russian colonialism in general. And by learning the stories of Ukrainians, Russians, and Crimean Tatars living in Crimea and all this dynamic, it opens your eyes how Russian colonialism operates. So you also often say these days that what we're experiencing in Ukraine is a war of decolonization. And as you mentioned, even personal decolonization for many of us, kind of understanding the impact that Russia had on our identities, on the language we speak, or how we identify. So can you, maybe share with us why you think it's important to look at what is happening in Ukraine through that specific lens of war against colonization and war of decolonization?
I had an interview with Yanina Sokolova, who is a brilliant Ukrainian journalist, in June, and she also shared with me story that she grew up in Zaporizhia, which is like a Cossack place of Zaporizhskaya Sech, and like from the beginning of our independence, like it's important to know. And she mentioned that at school she also learned a lot of stories about like Soviet power, and that when she graduated from school, she shared the story that she gave a speech, and she asked a lot of things for Russian teachers for some reason. So she grew up in Zaporizhia, but she shared the story with Russian teachers, that Russian teachers are great. She mentioned Russia as the motherland of her place, that like we have these Russian roots, etc. And unfortunately, the same situation we had in Crimea, the same situation we had in eastern part of Ukraine, and a lot of people only now realizing the scale of this colonization. And we even didn't have a chance to think about it. We even didn't have a chance to realize it. And only when this war started, we realized that during all these years, we were under this influence of Russia. We watched Russian TV channels. For example, the first territory conflict Russia and Ukraine had in 2003 in Tuzla, which is a peninsula close to Crimean, to Kerch. I grew up. And as a young journalist, and I was already a young journalist, I remember that the difference how this story was shared by Russian TV channels and how the story was shared by Ukrainian TV channels. And I felt this difference even I was 13 years old, 14 years old girl. But a lot of people in these regions watched Russian TV channels, and it was the reality. We unfortunately we don't know our own history, because in schools we had different variations of this history.
Yeah. We don't even know the history of our families. I mean, of course, probably with yours, it's even more tragic because of genocide of Crimean Tatars and deportation. But like only recently, I discovered that 2/3 of my father's family was repressed and deported to the north in 30s. And even my father didn't know that. So I actually find out through open databases of people who suffered from Russian repressions and Russian purges of 30s. And I shared it with my father, and he was like shocked to figure out that his grandfather never talked about the whole, 2/3 of his family disappearing one day, and they never spoke about it ever since. It's it's shocking that even within our own family histories we have massive gaps of stories that are lost or erased completely.
And it's important to repeat these things over and over again, because unfortunately we're still seeing loads of people idolize the Soviet Union, and it seems like only through personal stories of complete erasure can we try and make people really pay attention to the fact that what's happening today is a continuation of a longer history of colonial kind of rule by Russian Empire and Soviet Union after that. And so it's really important, and thank you so much, Sevgil, for sharing your story as well. But Maksym, you had a question as well, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Sevgil if it's possible. You mentioned a bit of label extremism, which is something that especially Russia, would label Crimean Tatars, and Russian colonial settlers in Crimea would paint Crimean Tatars who would like to come back home in 90s as, these Muslim extremists that will come and take our homes. And this kind of a strategy of othering Crimean Tatars and painting them as radicals and extremists paved the way for, I think, you can still call it ethnic cleansing that is still happening in Crimea by Russian occupational forces when it comes to Crimean Tatars. But it was also extrapolated on Ukrainians. So now any Ukrainian who is supporting the idea of independent Ukraine is labeled Nazi extremist by Russian propaganda. So can you talk a bit more how this idea of extremism originated and how it helps Russia to secure or at least to keep colonizing Crimea at the moment?
I want to add one more point that it's normal situation for all Ukrainian families and for all our generations that you collect bit by bit the history of your family, and it's the same with me. The same with me because a lot of things they just disappeared, and you even don't have a chance to find the whole story and to restore the story. But about Crimean radicalism and about colonization right now, even today we published an absolutely wonderful story about Nariman Jalal, who is a good friend of mine, and he is a deputy of Majlis. Majlis, it's kind of our Crimean Tatar government, representative in representative sphere. And Nariman Jalal, last year he visited Crimean platform, and 1 month after he came back to Crimea, he was arrested. And Russian authorities in Crimea started just to to manufacture his criminal case, and now he became a terrorist. And 3 days ago, it was last court, and unfortunately, with like 100%, he will receive around 15 to 20 years in Russian prison, because he just participated in this Crimean platform last year. And it's absolutely normal situation. It's not only one example how it works in occupied Crimea. For the last 8 years, a lot of people were arrested as a terrorist, and they received 15 to 22 years in Russian prisons, not only in occupied Crimea, but in other Russian cities. They want Crimeans, they want Russian people believe that Crimean Tatars are dangerous, that they are terrorists, and just fight with our nation, with labeling us as a terrorist, with labeling us as radicals, and all these labels, and how to fight with it. Of course, as a human rights defender, as a lot of organizations, human rights violation, spread this information with international partners, but unfortunately, it doesn't help, and it's a strategy of Russia in occupied Crimea. It's a strategy, unfortunately, and also unfortunately, it's an absolutely successful strategy because a lot of people left Crimea for the last 8 years after all these accusations.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing that, well, not funny, but still, these days, sometimes I see some poetry by Crimean Tatars that is devoted to the stories of Crimean Tatar deportation and then return. And unfortunately, there is no translation of this really great verse. I will try to find it and pin it to the conversation. But it's basically about the return of Crimean Tatars to Crimea that was written in the 90s. And when I was reading it, it was so moving because it basically spoke to the experience of many Ukrainians now who were deported from occupied territories, including, the families that caught in occupation like mine. And it's just moving. And I think maybe you will agree that people outside who want to understand the experiences of many Ukrainians who are going through these deportations and losing their homes, they also need to learn more about Crimean Tatar deportation and genocide that happened in 1944.
Yes, around 5 years ago already, we published a book about Crimean Tatar leader Mustafa Dzhemilev, who's a famous Soviet dissident, and he shared the story of his family, and we also shared the stories of thousands of Crimean Tatars activists and families. And I was so much shocked of that everyone's story is so unique and so dramatic and so sensitive at the same time. So, and even like story of Mustafa Dzhemilev, who is, I think that he was one of the most famous Crimean Tatar in the world, together with Jamala, who is a Eurovision winner in 2016. And what was absolutely unique and for me as for journalist, that Mustafa Dzhemilev was born in Crimea just 6 months before deportation of Crimean Tatars. So he was just 6 months old. And he dedicated all his life. So he spent around 15 years in Soviet prisons. Soviet prisons. He had 3 terms in Soviet prisons for his dissident work. But he was just 6 months old, so he didn't even know how Crimea looked like. But he dedicated all his life for this fight, and it's an absolutely unique situation. We gathered the story of all these victims, all witnesses of this deportation. Unfortunately, a lot of people died because it's already 78 years ago. So a lot of people died, and it became a history. And I understand that probably for my kids, I will tell of course, I will tell my story, my personal story, because I have already my personal tragedy. I'm not able to visit Crimea for the last 8 years. I miss my family, I miss my natives, I miss my life in Crimea. But the story of deportation, I had a chance in my childhood to hear the story from my grandmother. But unfortunately, my kids will hear the story from me, and it will be not full. It will be not full how it was the story of my grandmother, unfortunately.
Yeah. You mentioned the song that Jamala brought to Eurovision in 2016, and of course it's a beautiful song, but I remember exactly, I think it was March or April, when I was sitting and suddenly saw this song and played for myself. And this was the first time when I actually cried over this song. It completely devastated me. I found the lyrics that I shared that says, when strangers are coming, they come to your house, they kill you all and say, we're not guilty, not guilty. Where's your mind? Humanity cries. You think you are gods, but everyone dies. Don't swallow my soul, our souls. We could build a future where people are free to live and love the happiest time. Where's your heart? Humanity rise. You think you're gods, but everyone dies. And it's
Sevgil
just, it
said
was...
there will be no
Yes, Paul.
singing, but there was singing from Maksym today.
It was marvelous, but I still like, I read through it, through these lyrics, and I think every Ukrainian relates 100% to the song, although it was written to honor the victims of Crimean Tatar deportation.
It's interesting that after this war, after 24th of February, even Jamala told me that you have an absolutely different understanding of this song, because now we all Crimean Tatars and everyone can find himself as a hero of this song, and everyone can understand words from this song.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of, Ukrainians before 2014 and prior to that, maybe in a way were like, couldn't relate in a way because of, as well, our privilege and the fact that Crimean Tatars have been at the forefront of fighting against this Russian imperial colonial power for such a long time just makes me very grateful and thankful that we're all Ukrainian together. We have, I think, time for a couple more questions. I wanted to ask you to go back to your role as editor-in-chief of Ukrainska Pravda. I sometimes ask this question as well to people who have been doing a lot of either reporting or educational content stuff since the beginning of the war. But what has been the most popular story that Ukrainska Pravda has covered since February 24th? Because I think it shows a lot about news, like behaviors of people, and
I think the most popular story we published, it was documentary. It's funny, but it's true. It was documentary Occupant. We received a video from phone of one of Russian soldiers, and our brilliant reporter Mikhail Tkach created a film based on this video. And it's absolutely amazing. We even received dozens of invitations from different documentary film festivals just to participate in contest, which is strange, but it is true. And we already received 3.8 million views on our YouTube. If you're talking about text version, the most popular stories were the list of Russian soldiers who came to Ukraine, and we published all surnames, and it became popular. And other story was about the villa of Ramzan Kadyrov. We found his villa in Dubai and investigated all story connected to this villa. And the sad part of the story that the man who helped us in Dubai after this investigation was deported from Dubai by authorities in United Emirates.
Oh God!
Yes,
sometimes people have to sacrifice a lot without knowing it. But that's super interesting. And for those who don't know, I think probably Ukrainska Pravda has the best investigative journalism in Ukraine. So if you are, and you guys now have a version in English as well, right?
Yes, and it's quite popular. It's popular. We around 1.5 million people read Ukrainska Pravda in English, which is an amazing result. We just started this English version in the end of February. And it's quite successful. So a lot of people from different countries, from Britain, from United States, read us in English.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much, Sevgil. We have our final, last traditional question that we've been asking our guests from the very beginning of Ukrainian Spaces. And it's the one that Maksym and I value and love the most. But and I think in the context of everything you said today about your background and identity and stories and what you do now, I think it will be really fascinating and interesting for everyone to hear the answer to this question from you. But what does it mean to be Ukrainian for you right now, and has it changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion?
To me, now to be Ukrainian and Ukrainian with Crimean Tatar origin, how I mentioned before, is to fight as much as possible for our future. And maybe also think about our past and keep all memories about this war, about previous tragedies in our families, in our nation. But think about future. So I live with a big hope that in future Ukraine will never, and Ukrainians, and I mean our kids, our next generation will never face with this brutality, and we will exist, and our country will exist, and will be Europeans. But the price of this is very, very high, and I hope that future generation will remember it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your stories and your work. It's been true honor to have you, and it's also was therapeutical to hear from you. I hope everyone else will also agree. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Sevgil.
Bye.
Yeah, we will stick around for a bit. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you, everyone, for listening to Ukrainian Spaces, but also if you are for the first time joining us, this is 100% volunteer, independent, and listener-supported project and initiative. We exist because you support us. So if you're not a sponsor and supporter yet, please check our Patreon page, Ukrainian Spaces, and become one if you fancy. We provide and we offer our sponsors lots of cool additional content. And most importantly, you can get front row seat to ask questions in person or through our help about our guests. If you like, you can do it on Patreon page, or you can just DM us there or on Twitter. And plus, we also launched our social media accounts specifically for Ukrainian Spaces on Twitter and Instagram. So also follow and share. And if you listen us as a podcast, don't forget to rate and comment, because that's important. That's how we are trending and start trending in so many countries because of that. But yeah, Valeria, I wanted to actually ask you a question that we got from one of our sponsors. And I think, are you still with me, right, here?
I am, yeah. I think I know that Sevgil had to run somewhere, so Sevgil, feel free to disconnect if you'd like. We just have a couple of housekeeping.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for
Thank
this.
you so much for joining us and taking the time. And talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Дякую. So, Val, we have a question. I'm not going to share the name probably, but the question is from our sponsor, and he's right. He writes, I wanted to say, I just discovered your podcast, and it's the most comforting thing I have heard since the beginning of full-scale invasion. I'm a Ukrainian Canadian, and my Ukrainian claim to fame is I'm the great-great-nephew of Kazimir Malevich, which, when I read that, it filled me with joy, because imagining a descendant of Malevich still fighting and speaking out against the Russian colonialism and Russian cultural appropriation is just an amazing thought to have. But he asks you about very important and actually super connected topic to Crimea, is about Ukrainians who are collaborators on the occupied lands. He asked about our thoughts, what we think about the motives of those Ukrainians, how Russia is getting a small number of Ukrainians to betray their country. And I think it's a timely moment to share what we think about it.
I was thinking about it before the episode, and I don't want to say anything too controversial here, but I think in the context of our conversation together, what many people perhaps don't realize when they look at collaborators with the Russians is this history of colonialism that we were just talking about, right? The fact that even, in schools we were taught certain things, we were, depending on where you lived as well, and so on, and it's been quite... And we've been talking about it since the beginning, right? The process of decolonization in ourselves has been a really long and tough one, but an important one. And some people don't feel the need to do that and continue living guided by a lot of these thoughts and imposed narratives that have been cultivated by Russian imperialism for a very long time. So I think a lot of it is about, like, not everyone has that ability or to step away and really think about the historical reasons for why people do certain things. But anyway, I hope everyone understands what I mean, in the sense that I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of collaborators also have been growing up with serious kind of not implications, but a serious pressure from the outside Russian propaganda machine. And then the other thing is also human nature, right? Like, it's not about being Ukrainian or not. Can you also still hear me?
Yeah.
It's not about being Ukrainian or not. It's just human nature, right? People, a lot of the time, just because they choose, a lot of people choose what is more comfortable, right? So if and sometimes something that's more safe or seemingly more safe. So it's a lot of the time, we just need to think a little bit about the motivations of those people. And I hope what I just said helps understand that a little bit better. But what about you, Maksym?
Yeah, it's a very emotional also topic, because part of my family is on occupation. So I try not to share as much because of security concerns, although the stories, of course, we hear regularly are just horrifying, and the extent of genocide and terror on Russian occupied territory, especially towards Ukrainians, especially those Ukrainians who do not speak or do not look like Russians would like them to look, is just unimaginable. But it also brings a bit of more nuance to this issue. I think, a lot of people shouldn't be quick to judge. Of course, there are laws, and Ukraine has those laws, and it clearly defines what it means to be a collaborator. And I think once the occupation is over, we can trust our government and our courts to establish the truth, who did what, and whether the law was broken. But also, I think we shouldn't be quick to judge situations of the people without knowing all the information. First of all, it's even very hard to get any information. I cannot reach my family for some weeks sometimes, because there is no connection, even telephone connection. And when I can reach, we can only exchange information that is safe to exchange, considering we need to be very paranoid, thinking if anyone listens, how this information can be weaponized against the people in occupation. But even then, unless you lived in occupation, unless you face that terror, and unless you personally know what it's like to make those decisions every day to survive, I don't think you should be quick to judge what it means to collaborate.
Yeah.
and what we should think of those people. I think this is not a conversation for now, but for the times when the occupation is over and people finally can talk there and speak their truths.
And I think there's a different level of collaborator that we're talking about. If it's like clearly, Medvedchuk and other people at a high government level who have been like, doing whatever they've been doing, that's one thing. And it's a very different story when you talk about what Maksym has been talking about. So I think it's also important to understand the level of power that a certain individual holds when we are talking about collaborators.
I think I'll close, if you don't mind, I'll close this question with a bit of a personal story. I remember that our family shared about our other occupation that happened during World War II, when the Nazis occupied our village in southern Ukraine. And I remember my grandma would tell a story about an official collaborator, Ukrainian collaborator in their village. So when Germans would come to the village, they usually would appoint some kind of a master, to the village, to occupational authority. Usually it would be German, but in their village that was Ukrainian, a collaborator. But what that person also did is he regularly alerted everyone about the planned slave raids by Germans, because Germans would often do those raids on Ukrainian villages and take people into labor slavery and take them back to Germany and Europe to build roads. And my grandmother was one of them. But he would alert a lot of people in advance, so they hide their kids, especially young women. And this was kind of like a story that stuck to me, to understand the nuance of the occupation and the wartime, and sometimes not all survival situations are black and white, and you need to look at each and every of those and make up your own mind. So yeah, unfortunately, Ukrainians keep suffering from this shit.
Yeah. But to round off our 1 hour session today, 1 hour conversation, not session sounds way too official, with something positive, we wanted to also thank Ola Hercules, who has added her message this week to our time capsule on her Instagram account, and share with you some of her notes for us as well. She's been one of our really kind of long-term support, well, long-term as 6 months. 6 months has been, but we wanted to also quickly read what she said so that all of you can see and listen to it as well. And Maksym, would you like to do that, or shall I?
I think it's better if you do it. So Ola is voiced over by another amazing Ukrainian woman.
Someone, my partner keeps saying that Ola looks, both of us look like she's my older sister, which I find funny. But anyway, so Ola shared, of course, the link to our last episode of Ukrainian Spaces Season 1, which many of you were here for as well. But essentially, Ola also added and said that my wish is for Ukrainians within Ukraine and those who, like me, live abroad, realize the power and importance of building up a community. I haven't had that in Kakhovka, in all honesty. We've been through tough times, and I feel like people and families kept to themselves. The first time I'd encountered serious community work in Ukraine was by Natalia from Experience Ukraine and Beyond, and Tanya from Molotok NGO. I wrote about their work and their Carpathian Nizhny Selishya community in summer kitchens. They've been creating amazing spaces and events for young people in the area and also for kids from eastern parts of Ukraine. We must build communities by creating spaces where people can meet and do something fun or meaningful, or both. I'm hoping that big charities and the Ukrainian government can help us create these spaces after victory. So thank you so much, Ola, and we'll leave you on this note about community before we close. And I hope that what we're doing here in a way is also creating that community, even though some of us are abroad, some of us are in Ukraine, some of us are all over the world, but it's that sense of community that we're trying to cultivate here together.
Absolutely. And I pinned the poetry and a small verse from a fantastic poem called Chokrak by Orest Korsovetsky. It's in Ukrainian, but you can use the Translate tweet or Google Translate it. Unfortunately, there's no English translation. But if you're Ukrainian, fellow Ukrainian, just read it and share it because it's so moving. And despite that, it's about the experiences of Crimean Tatar returning back to ancestral homes to Crimea. It speaks to every Ukrainian these days. So this is just a gem. That's it. Thank you so much for today. It was moving and great, and we will be come back soon with the new Ukrainian Spaces episodes. But for now, that's it. Apart from one thing, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава, and see you next time.
Bye.